Welcome to Corporate Law Lab. I'm Neil Taylor, the host of the podcast. I'm hesitating because I'm going to say the name of the law school right because it's changed. I'm the director of the Corporate Law Center at the Donald P. Kleekamp College of Law at the University of Cincinnati. There, I did it one time correctly. Our guest today is Suze Mueller. She is, well, you tell me, what are all the what's the top line name? That Mueller Consulting Group? Is that where we
Yes.
start with? Okay.
Yes.
And then we're
I
also
am.
joined by Irene Monti, who just graduated about a week ago from our International LLM program and will be returning to, have you finished your degree at Trento?
Have not.
You have not. Okay. So she's going back to Trento to finish her other legal degree because some people need to.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on, Neil. And Irene, congratulations on your LLM.
Thank you.
So ordinarily, regular listeners of the podcast, and I think there are 2 or 3, I'm joking, there's several hundred, will know that ordinarily we spend most of the podcast kind of taking a linear progression through someone's career. And most of those careers turn out not to be very linear, and that gives us lots of opportunities. Suze is certainly no exception, but she's just launched a new product called Aura, which is around AI and and really AI governance, I guess would be the best way to say it. So before we get there, can you give us a brief summary of your career and education? You don't have to start at high school, unless you're from Cincinnati, in which you do.
It's typical. I went to Rutgers University and then for undergraduate, and then I went to the University of Cincinnati College of Law, Donald P. Kleekamp College of Law, and graduated in 2001. Prior to graduating, I worked as an intern with GE Aircraft Engines in their mergers and acquisitions group. I was their first intern in this, and hence that'll come later as we discuss more of my frameworks, how this background worked into it. I was told at GE that if I wanted to be an excellent corporate lawyer, I needed to learn how to litigate contracts. So that's exactly what I did. When I graduated, I went to one of the top regional litigation firms where they did stuff like RICO and huge class action suits for huge companies, although they're sitting in Dayton, Ohio. Amazing work, millions of pages of discovery. It taught me why I write a contract the way that I do, what the real issues are. And that started me on the path of making sure my stuff was always very clear. Beyond that, from there, I was called up after a couple of years in practice. Someone needed help at ABX Air, which was Airborne Express. They were looking for a first-time general counsel. DHL had come in and bought Deutsche Post had come in and bought DHL, and they couldn't own the airline because of foreign ownership constraints post 9/11. So in 2003, I was asked if I would join that team as assistant general counsel. And I did, and that was my first foray into straight aviation. I spent about 7.5 years in that role in various positions, first for ABX Air, and then we acquired several airlines. And then I was assistant general counsel for the publicly traded aviation group, which had an MRO, a fuel farm, you name it, 3 dogs, a chicken, we did it all. It was fantastic. During that time, I got married to a German executive, and we made the decision for us to relocate back to Germany. I knew I couldn't practice law there, so I opened up a consulting firm, and this is the downstream product of it. 11 years later, I've stepped into other corporate chief legal officer roles throughout when I've been called by friends for projects and such. But basically, here we are 13 years later with Mueller Consulting Group, and it's great. We help boards make good decisions around AI deployments for today when the deployment is happening, and for tomorrow when they're looking at their market cap.
So a lot of your work pre-AI at Mueller Consulting, it looks like cross-border transactions is kind of your sweet spot.
Yeah, I'm a deal person. I love the deal. I've had the good fortune to acquire somewhere around 5 airlines, put down 90 tails, and build the largest 767-200 fleet in the world off ANA and Delta's tails. We turn them from passenger to cargo configuration. So yeah, I've had a lot of deal making, a lot of fun at the table.
Well, I think cross-border transactions, it sounds very like there's a lot of pizzazz, and it's really just a tremendous amount of work. I'll
Yeah,
never forget like sitting in a conference room in Paris and having the Works Council representatives explain to me that my billion-dollar transaction that we had just completed was completely was just a nullity because they had not been consulted before our two public companies merged. And we're like, and according to the law that they were looking at, they were right,
right.
but that's just not how it was going to work. And so the level of complexity that is involved, but is also just kind of like these two things can't work together this way, and you just
Yeah.
have to manage around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in aviation, when you're selling something that's high risk to begin with to different jurisdictions that have completely different frameworks, needs, requirements, when you actually transfer the asset is an issue because one no longer has responsibility, one has responsibility. But sometimes it has to stay with the person who sold it to them because of work that has to be done on the aircraft can't be done in the other jurisdiction. So I call it transactions with many tentacles, like an octopus.
Sounds great. So I'm going to turn it over to Irene now, and she's going to start talking to you about, I guess, the process of how you developed this product and this business actually of advising aviation companies and others, I guess, on
Yes,
how
absolutely.
to navigate the AI landscape.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to ask you first to define aura,
Okay.
what it is
Yes.
for us, what the Agentic Constitution is, and the other 20%, what's the difference between them? I think I'm too far away from the mic. Um,
You're good.
and yeah, so let's start with this.
Okay, well, let me start with Aura, because Aura and the Agentic Constitution work side by side. They're not on top of each other. This started generally when I started to read about AI, and I looked at what boards were going to have to do to make good fiduciary decisions around this. And I realized whether everyone knew it or not, they had just entered aviation. The consequential decisions at the top now are just as serious. And yet these boards have never been taught to make these types of consequential decisions outside of bid expenditures with gated check-ins. So I started to think about a governance system, and I came up with Aura. I grounded in OECD principles, so it's got fairness, and we are looking towards developing economies, so that is the basis of it. It stands for AI Utility Risk Alignment. And that's exactly what it's meant to be. You decide your risk tolerance, you decide your vision. I did it in 5 phases. Good governance can be done in any number of phases. I organize it this way because to me it was intuitive. It's the same way I check to see the valuation of a company that's using AI. I compare it to my system to see whether they have embedded governance. So I look in 5 phases. The first one is the charter. The charter is the vision of the board. You can't possibly deploy anything if you don't know what you privilege when 2 decisions need to be made. Is it speed over accuracy? Is it those that don't have a voice versus the shareholders? These are all ethical decisions, and they're built into the deployment. And I don't mean ethical in some you can't figure it out way, because there's no judgment behind it. But a vision, when you architect what you will and won't into the deployment, is so much easier to deploy from because you're not really litigating what your vision is every time. If you need to veer from it, that's a governance event. We record that. We log why we veer it. In fact, one of the things that changes most in the boardroom now, where it used to be opacity, hi, we've just passed this, everyone's good, we're all in agreement. That doesn't work in the AI. In AI, you must write things down. You must write the rationale behind them. You must already name at the time you make the decision the cadence with which you'll revisit it, because decisions in AI decay, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So you put down your vision. Then your second phase is I teach you how to ex ante and sandbox and pilot, because nothing gets deployed before you test it at the edges. You test it at, various red teaming. You make sure it was built to do what was intended. Then we go into the third phase, which I consider the most important. That's training. And notice training is before deployment. Being a human in a loop is not the end to a cute acronym. It's an incredibly important position, the last line of defense. And that person needs to know what they're doing and why they're doing it. So we don't train once, we train continually, and we get their feedback and feed it into our audits, which is in the next phase 4. We audit everything at regular intervals and at events, 2 types of cadence, right? And then we take that great information that we've learned and we use it to improve the deployment and every deployment going further. That's the magic. And the last phase I build into part of the governance program because I think it's important that we plan to decommission and retire tools when we put them into action. There are heavy penalties around the data. The data obligations do not leave because the tool has been retired. So I find when I have the board and everyone on board with how it will be decommissioned, because it will be, new tools will come out, they can go through the process without fear when they want to move things around. They don't feel calcified. So that's in 5 phases what Aura looks like.
Quick question.
Yeah.
When you say the just on the last piece, IT tools, I think many people are looking at AI as another IT tool, and IT tools generally don't ever go away. I mean, if you look at, how the structure of a multinational corporation's IT architecture is, what oftentimes you'll find, and it's especially true in government, is that it's layers of paint on top of each other.
Yes.
And somewhere down at the bottom is maybe some program running, that was coded in COBOL that is still around. What kind of, do you get resistance when you say it needs to die someday? Because the assumption is that IT tools are forever and that we build on top of them.
I don't really get any resistance. I think most people recognize that the speed at which IA is moving, at which it's growing, and in which its capabilities are increasing is exponentially getting faster. So that's not the piece I really get it on. I think there is a comfort around having embedded tools, but AI doesn't really work.
That's a
that
multi-language
way.
problem.
I know. Yeah, sprechen Sie Deutsch? Anyway,
Yeah.
so it doesn't work that way. It's gonna have to be replaced because if you build on something degraded, let's just assume it got older. That means your foundation is the weakest part of your system because we tend to build on things. And now all you're doing is calcifying a bad foundation. Not a great idea. And by the way, many governances, many government programs and many big companies are realizing they kind of have an issue with their data because it's not okay. And that has to be redone. You can't look the other way. The last thing I would say is geopolitically, I don't think it is responsible to believe what you have today will be okay tomorrow. Data provenance changes, most favored nation status changes. Geopolitical has become nationalization of assets. It's way too interconnected disconnected to assume what you've got today is good tomorrow.
A question about the Agentic Constitution in general. Because
Yes.
I've been working with Neil on compliance and whistleblowing in particular, so I can't help but look at it that way.
Sure.
And going back to when you were saying that you worked a lot on contracts, transnational businesses. I was thinking that it really shows in the way you wrote the Agentic Constitution, because you can see that you were thinking about the keyword here is prevention
Yes.
and accountability.
Yes.
And I was really curious about how you went about that. What was the thought process behind it?
Well, I had spent a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, some time in the U.S. doing nothing but learning AI. I took an AI mastery course for 6 months, learned how to build, and I had some wonderful mentors. One of them was Noelle Russell, who helped Jeff Bezos build Alexis. Fabulous CTO, really caring about the diversity perspective. And she had mentioned this idea that there's a disconnect in how we treat agents and this idea of a constitution from a technical end, which made sense. That's where she came from. I had been fascinated about the fact that it's difficult to get the board to understand not only what they're approving, but the CTO to understand what was approved so they can build it. Take the flat intent and make it 3D. So that's where the Agentic Constitution came about, those two inspirations. I needed a document that would describe what an agent does, what could be static. 80% I talk in terms of set principles that you can build by, and 20% I break down to what I call the deployment layer, because every individual deployment will have its own named person, its own stewardship committee, all these different things. So the 80-20 helps you deploy faster. So my inspiration around it was to make sure boards understood what they were approving so they could make their fiduciary obligation, and CTOs understood what the board wanted so they could build within the constraints, and intentions were being shared.
Boards tend to think that they're there just for strategic purposes. And it seems to me in reading the Constitution that they have to understand how the business and the agent is being managed.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious how much pushback, or maybe they just think, oh, well, I can do it because here I am, I'm on the board, so therefore I can do it. But they weren't really selected for their ability to manage particular issues.
Yeah, I believe Harvard Law Forum did a piece where they said outside of technology, 12% of the board members felt competent to decide issues around AI. So they're feeling the same thing.
Go ahead, Irene.
Well, yeah, I'm really stuck on this. I really want to compliment you on the way you were you chose to be understood by the board, by everyone in corporations, and you were at the same time repetitive just to make sure that they got every one of the points, but at the same time without becoming almost paternalistic, I want to say, because that's risk. And one of the things that I really appreciated is the way you made it clear that every agent has a named human owner.
Yes.
So that you get to a point where you never break a chain and that there is no ambiguity whatsoever. The goal is to never have that kind of problem. How do people react to that?
Well, I think once you tell them and you equate it to an actual worker, they understand. You have to have job descriptions. You have to have guidelines. You have to know what's allowable, because at some point what agents do well is make decisions. If you haven't given the guidelines by which to make those decisions by building into the architecture, that's allowable, that's not. When you're unsure, escalate, don't execute. These are things that are absolutely part of it. Does a board have to be able to build it? Of course not. But a board must understand that there are tools like gateways, like monitoring systems, like human in the loop that can carry out their intent. And their intent needs to be built around this type of careful architecture. So, I think when I say to someone it's like a person, they get the analogy. When we personify something, it's easier. And I think you say, look, you wouldn't send someone out there without a job description. You wouldn't just say, go for it, make it up as you go along. You can't, because the truth is that liability at this point does not transfer to the agent. Don't know what'll happen down the road, but at this point, the liability stays with the fiduciary. So I just want to make sure that they understand the information they need to consider to carry out their fiduciary obligation with respect to AI.
I'll jump in again. What you just said about you can't put the liability to the agent. Many compliance plans are built around the idea of, we will put a structure in place so that people understand what their obligations are. And if something goes wrong, the company gets to go to the authorities and self-report and say, the problem isn't us, it's Irene. She
Right.
didn't do it right. And therefore we should not be held responsible because we told her what was acceptable and what wasn't, and she went off on her own, and we're now, doing all the things that you have to do. I mean, we can go through the 7 features of an effective compliance program if we really want to bore everyone to death. But I don't think you can do that with the agent. Like, we told it what to do and it ignored us, right?
Yeah, you can't do that, because the people telling it what to do are, whether they're the developer or not, they're expressing their intent. And again, if they're doing it from a vision, they know what the main guidelines are. They fit what the charter, what their obligations are as a corporation to the outside. Then when they get to the 80%, a group of principles will follow every agent. We're going to stop bias drift. None of these things are shocking, right? We're going to protect those end users who had no voice in this and be fair with their data, right? We're going to do the right things around that. And that 80% is static. But truly the dangerous part is the 20%. And that has to be thought about every time, because I might use one asset with one stack to prove something has occurred in a way that regulators and my own records can substantiate it for due diligence, and it may not be, the right way. So I think what I'm doing here is giving them a map. You can go left, you can go right. We'll get you to a program where you can control this as much as it can be today. But standing in the middle of the road, you're going to get hit. There's just no two ways around it.
Okay, well, I was wondering if there's a way you can make it look more practical for us. Like, I am a company. I come to you and I want to do this.
Right.
What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I'll get, calls from board members, and they'll say, we want to take AI and we want to embed it in legal. We think it's going to help with our contracting. We think it's going to make it go through faster. It can crunch numbers and data for us for due diligence. And that could be totally appropriate. That could be a fine place to start a deployment. Many times, however, they don't want to put too big of a corral on it because they're planning for it to grow and to scale, which is antithetical to what you need to do for good AI. AI needs to be roped in and done a little bit. So when they say, hey, we're going to do it in all of legal, you say, well, wait a second. You don't roll anything out to all of anything, because then the only thing you can do is roll all of it back. So we slow roll stuff. So start thinking in terms of a pinch point. You want to do it for contract reviews. Maybe you want to build a supervisor agent that overlooks what the agent does, but at the end still have the human in the loop right now. And you need to roll slowly. So the real world is thinking small, do minimum viable builds, be able to govern it, and build for scale. And you will find your deployments are much more successful because you're controlling them at each stage.
Yeah, I mean, to put an example to it, when I was running most of the legal department at Avnet, or at least the North American side, and then later the European side. So I did everything but Asia at some point in my career. We had an escalation matrix for contract managers, things that they were allowed to do themselves because whichever way that came out, we were going to be fine with it. Things that they had to escalate to a manager, and then eventually things that were mission critical that had to be escalated to me.
Right.
So if you say, well, we're going to have AI do all of our contracting, which one of those layers are you doing? If you do the one, if you allow it to go all the way to making the mission critical decisions, then you probably setting yourself up for a problem. Right?
You're right. You're probably going to pay some sort of penalty, but more than that, you're going to build that calcified foundation we talked about, which is bad decision making becoming entrenched. But I think it's true. I think, look, we want to get the deployments out there, but you really need to look at it and use the legal example. Let's say we do it on the first level. You get an associate who's going to crunch it through and get the first pass. Knowing that AI works in patterns, you have to remember the soft edges, those parts that it thinks are unimportant. That's where strategy lives. If you flatten your optionality too much and you don't have humans involved, you start to lose your own edge, the thing that differentiates you with a tool and everyone else with a tool. So I'm always wary of being very cognizant of what layer and how many times it's being stepped on. So I really appreciate that you brought up a story that talked about layers, because what if all three people do that? What is the board getting? Something that's been so stepped on, it's got nothing of no value of, that will, and this is all part of a deployment decision, isn't it? Right. Because in the end, we want the best for our corporations. So it's getting people to explore what it looks like in actuality, what people will be let go if we're going to let people go, and what institutional knowledge leaves with that. And what if all of a sudden now your data is in not a most favored nation place, geopolitical bomb went off, and you can't get to your own data, but your institutional knowledge has walked off. So it's an important tarantella. It's an important, careful look around the entirety of what you're trying to do to make sure it's the right choice. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
And when deciding what's important and what is not, do you leave it all to the company, or do you help them out in figuring out what the priorities are, especially considering that once the core values are decided, then they're not easy to change?
Yeah, I mean, I help guide them. It's their vision. It's what they have to live by. It's like convincing someone to go to law school. Sometime during second or third year, that person's going to hate you at 3 a.m. Okay, it's just, they're going to regret it. So it has to be their decision. I can guide them. I can mentor them. I can tell them what tools are out there. I can tell them how to train people, but it's their vision, and I'm not there most of the time. So what I give them is the competency to understand what's at stake and how to get the information they need to make a good decision that they feel comfortable owning.
Okay. Because it kind of hit me reading the Constitution, that it will stay linear. It will stay linear and consistent, every agent. And that's one of the biggest human flaws, of course. Yeah. So the fact that once it's decided, you're completely committed, I was wondering how, in reality, that actually plays out.
Well, it's got to be built into the deployment. There's a paper intent that we can always express. What the principles are actually instructions to the builder. to say as part of its architecture, it can't do this, it can do this, we will do this. So you're not talking about paper intent, we're talking about architectured intent. And that gives it its reality.
I had a question that's tied to that, where you talk about jurisdictional constraints and quoting, every agent operates within the legal boundaries of every jurisdiction in which it acts. And the way different countries and regimes and the EU and are approaching this is so markedly different. And then, countries do an about face. I mean, there was the, Biden era regulations that I think are all now gone through a shredder somewhere. How does it feel like the Wild West? And how do you help companies navigate that those jurisdictional constraints are anywhere from very serious to completely non-existent?
Well, we map out where they're doing business, where their data lives. We map everything out literally. And I do that for two reasons. So we can crosswalk whatever regulations would be there, and they can make decision at which risk level to deploy at. It's one thing to do it under RMF NIST in the United States, or it's another with the EU Act that pulls in the GDPR. And right now I'm in MENA, and Dr. Suzanne El Akabawi just released the GDPR for Egypt that's going into effect November 26th, which is actually arguably more difficult than what the EU requires and has an extraterritorial reach. So you've got the data because you have to actually get licensure. So what you have to do is crosswalk. I map everything.
For people that don't exist in the space, GDPR is?
Sorry. Yeah, it's the Data Privacy Act. I can't think of the first word as soon as you said that.
I think General Data.
Yeah, General Data Privacy Act. But it's all the data regulation that we all hate, that we have to make sure that people who don't really opt in are treated with care. So it's how we react to people giving us their private data and how we hold to that commitment, both as we're actively using it and as we retire it. And it's got some pretty deep teeth. Now, like I said, in the EU Act, which you can discuss what the EU Act really is because they've put off so many parts of it at this point. So that's a whole different discussion. But having this extraterritorial reach of these other things that pull it in really require you to map the datas, map the regulatory frameworks, see where they're getting more complicated, where there's a risk. And I always say, if you're in a risky territory, always have a second option, whether that's a second option for cloud, for where your data is, because you don't want to be into a deployment and then find out you have to shut down your whole system because of geopolitics or GDPR or something else. You need a second pipeline. So again, part of the architecture, let's plan for what the world is actually doing now, not what we'd like it to do.
When I was at Avnet, we were in 67 countries, and we wanted to have one rule for everything if we could, an Avnet way. And what that often ended up being is that we just had to follow the EU rules and make everyone else live with it. And I get lots of pushback on that, especially in data privacy and the type of issues that we're talking about. When I'd say to an executive in Phoenix that Suze's German phone number is actually, even though we own the phone, we got her the number, it still is a piece of personal private data that we have to understand that we need her consent to publish. And they're like, well, that's ridiculous. I'm like, well, I don't care whether it's ridiculous or not, it's the law. I wonder how, I don't think this is an answerable question actually, but I do think if you are starting from the standpoint of your P&G, mapping the data is easy, it's everywhere.
Right. And then you're doing the right thing, Neil. You're doing what an excellent general counsel does, which to say we hold ourselves to the highest, most restrictive standards. You have to do that. When you're that all over the place, you just have to. Now, if you're able to vector things off, and there are some things that you can do, you can talk about whether it really has to go into that jurisdiction. Do you want to wall it off? But again, it's all about the architecture and what we're discussing. But the way we get there is I map them and let them see how many jurisdictions they're pulling into and which ones may be problematic for which reasons.
Well, I'm a bigger fan of the human side of all of this.
Okay.
I'm really curious because I've seen, not in my personal experience, but I've heard a lot about how boards tend to override everything. A lot of I don't know how to explain it. English is failing me.
You mean that the board sets a grand strategic direction without understanding the what might actually happen on the ground
Exactly.
with regard to
Yeah.
that.
Exactly. Thank you. In this situation, that's not an option. Everyone has their job. Every agent has its own duties and responsibilities and data and limits.
Mhm.
Do you think that goes well with the human nature?
Well, I think humans are fine with controlling things they understand how to control. Uh, AI has been essentially, for most people, the black box equivalent of we don't know what's inside. What I think is important is when we demystify, but by training them properly on not what the output is, because that's rarely what's important. What's in the log, what it's thinking, the scratch pad can be inherently more important, or red teaming to get those problem areas. But teaching people what a human in the loop is, what an awesome responsibility it is. If they understand it, they step up into the position. They don't have to fake it. They don't have to just ride whatever the agent says and rubber stamp it. So training is such an important part of it, and retraining. And if I didn't say it, retraining again, because it's constantly shifting. Give people what they need to do their jobs.
Which leads to another, I think it's principle 8 on the Constitution of every agent must be honest about what it knows and what it doesn't know.
Yeah.
And, for anyone that's ever played around in ChatGPT, and I have not done the latest version, so please don't sue me, Sam Altman, if I say something that about your baby.
Mm,
But it very confidently tells me things that are wrong all the time.
yes. Yes.
And in fact, sometimes I just stop talking to it because I generally don't use it very much. And I find that the deeper I dig, the less I think that it got it right. But it's
Mhm.
very confident in expressing those thoughts.
Yes.
And, the confidence heuristic, I mean, Irene was talking about how us humans think. If
Mhm.
somebody tells us something very confidently, the confidence heuristic says we tend to believe it.
Yes.
And these models have been trained, these agents have been trained to speak with great confidence. How
Yes.
does there's a question in there somewhere.
Yeah, I think the question is, how would someone know, given the great confidence they answer with? And I think the answer is we accept that they're arrogant and they are going to, hallucinate, and they're going to sell us hallucination. And once we know that, we realize our job is so much greater than just putting a rubber stamp on what the tool's doing. It's got some tendencies that we really need to push back on. And then we need to take those tendencies and make sure we hard code it. When I see my system arguing about something that's completely ludicrous, it's a teaching moment. It is a gateway moment. It is, we do not go near that because of this. Should you hit that again, you are to immediately default back to, I don't have the information to make that call. And again, we're socializing what we're learning, feeding that golden goodness back in, and getting better answers. But presume it drifts, it hallucinates, it makes things up. Don't anthropomorphize your chat GPT. We all personify it, but we don't need to have an expectation that it cares about us. It doesn't. Okay? It's a computer. So remaining in human primacy and reminding people that human primacy is important in this is how I get people to understand how great a responsibility they have for our future and their participation in it.
And when they say, I'm going to fall behind if I listen to you, because everyone else is going at breakneck speed and, move fast and break things. And they're like, oh, well, you're telling me that I'm going to be at the end of the road here instead of out there leading like I want to be. How do you react to that?
Well, look, I mean, you can lead a blind parade with a blindfold, but that's not going to get you where you want to go. At the end of the day, doing the governance ahead of time allows you to do clear deployments that make sense, that bring value. But the other thing is that people who are considering buying entities are looking for embedded governance. I don't care what the tools are doing. If I can't see that there is a logic and decision trail that I can revisit if I replace that whole board because they took the time and the care to say why they made the deployment and what the constraints were, I've got nothing but a liability because I don't know the terms under which I should revisit the decision because I don't know the basis for it. So we can certainly go headfirst into a wall. It's an option. I find then they call me in a worse position, happy to help in wherever they are in the process. But if you want to do it the best way for the most value, you start with embedded governance. And I promise you, it makes deployments faster and better.
So before deployment, just to wrap my head around it, you train the agents with the people, the humans that are going to be responsible for them.
Yes.
They grow together and they learn together how to work.
Well, what happens is the deployment is written with certain specifications to take over the jobs. Once you get the deployment working and you've trained your people on the things where you need to have a human. Not everything requires a human in a loop. It's not an important decision, but those that are consequential do. So you train your people to that end. And then I always advise that you keep what I call a deployment stewardship committee, which is a committee of technical people and leaders and of end users that are there for the life of the deployment. And it speaks to what's going on. So you know real time if this deployment is doing at those three levels what it was intended to do. And of course, then you make a decision to continue to kill or to tweak the deployment.
I think I saw in one of your LinkedIn posts, I've been following you for quite some time now, that your experience in the highly regulated aviation industry really informs a lot of what you've done here in building it.
Yeah.
Is that fair characterization?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How do companies who are not in highly regulated industries react to the level of rigor that you're putting on them here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think that you go to an airline industry and they're like, yeah, we're used to this kind of thinking. You go to some other industry that's not terribly regulated, and is used to just making it up, building the plane as they fly it, which everyone says outside of the aviation industry, right?
Right.
How does that work in terms of convincing people who are not used to this level of rigor in how they set things up?
Well, first of all, everyone doesn't require the same level of rigor. Obviously, the type of information, the type of data, and the type of processing we're doing is going to directly reflect how much governance is needed. Okay. Yes, obviously, in financial sectors and healthcare, when I talk to energy, they get me. I call it aviation-grade governance. They get it. Other places that are smaller outside of it don't need the same level, but they still need to be aware of what their deployment does and how they can kill it without an official meeting. Because if you can't do that, you've done nothing. All you've done is open the front door and invite every mosquito in without a net. It's just we adjust for the situation of what the rigor that they need, but they still need base knowledge, base understanding in order to deploy in a way that's going to bring them value. Anyone can deploy. Deploy to bring you value's the game. So I say ethics with abundance. When you do it right, trust me, the money is on the other side.
How much do you think ethics is a competitive advantage? Because I see a lot of people in the ethics consulting industry selling it that way. Do you think of it that way?
Look, I don't want to say that a group of ethics exists to be judged against. I look at it as vision. I look at it as two things that are competing and a decision has to be made. And we embed those decisions, whatever privilege lens, we're going to name that privilege lens. You're going to come up against these tensions. So do I think it sells to say when it gets into tensions, know what they are and know what you favor? Yeah, because it gets them where they want to go. I'm not judging what they're doing if they're accepting the risk. That's not what it's about. So I don't think ethics is something that's highly esoteric. I think it's something that's very much in your decision making and in your architecture of your deployment.
Do you think that courts anywhere need to come up with a new way of looking at fiduciary duties to impart to boards their obligations here? Or do you think that existing law that we've had for as long as we've had it just naturally flows over to these issues?
Well, being in the U.S., it's different because, again, RMF NIST is more recommendation than it is, punitive based like the EU AI Act. So I would say that there's going to be some leeway, but something is going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years that is going to push the issue. We talked a little bit of back and forth about the Caremark case and standards that was coming out of that. And I recently wrote an article that said, well, wait a second here, guys. This is going to be applicable to any AI decision as well. If you go back and look how many decisions they could have intervened with, at some point they're going to get caught. So if you have boards that believe they don't have to know this and they can just deploy it, that's who the regulators will be going after. We may not have the perfect answers today. This is a very fast moving area. But again, my theory is go left, go right. Don't stand in the middle and wait to get hit.
Yeah, and next time we talk about Caremark, we got to get you on a plane so you can come talk to the whole group, because we just did this symposium on it a few months ago. And one of my arguments about Caremark is that it forced companies to look at decisions through the lens of whether or not they were going to be criminally prosecuted, instead of actually what they were prepared to defend and what they wanted to do, and how do you actually get people on board other than just by saying you might go to jail if it goes poorly.
Right. Well, I think with AI, you're going to see, and I think we've come to realize that AI itself is a J curve with respect to learning. And so you have to accept that J curve. You have to accept doing the embedded, doing the work, understanding the basis for deployment, what the risk looks like in multi-agent environments before you can get the goodness. So we all want to go to the up. But it doesn't work that way with AI. And if you try to skip those steps, it can have disastrous consequences. Forget the fact that you're not going to make money on your deployment. Some decisions are irreversible, and they're irreversible in the damage that they do as well. So you need to be careful about doing it blindly. There's too much at stake, whether companies believe it or not. I truly believe they're in the same risk profile now as aviation. They just don't know it.
Does every board need to now go get a designated technical person? There was when the financial crisis hit, I can't remember actually if it was Enron or the financial crisis, that I guess it was Sarbanes, where we said O.J. Simpson can't be on the audit committee anymore,
Right.
Which he was at Hertz, believe it or not. And so does every board now need to go get a tech person that they turn to and say, oh, tell us what we know here or shouldn't know here?
Well, I think the idea of the Agentic Constitution was to give them that type of visibility to the build level. Should boards have mentors that are helping them understand AI? If they don't have that organically, yes. It's important that they know what they don't know and they learn it now. It's just never going to be the same foot race with a board that understands what it's doing versus a board that's just going off and doing what it thinks it wants to do. It's just not going to be the same. And they'll lose their competition that way because they'll taint their own waters by not having control on it, by not having the ability to kill it, by not knowing what escalation looks like. That's going to happen organically. So I think boards are coming around to understanding. I think that they see that this is different and new and somehow much more dangerous. But the danger is there for them in the beginning because they don't know anything about it and they must embrace it. They just must. Or they can't deploy it. They can't be part of the decision.
How does it impact when they're not necessarily building their own, but, because so many companies will go they go to Anthropic and say, okay, this is what we want to do. And they obviously are not going to be given access to the source code, right? To understand what's really going on underneath there. How do you think about that where you're building something on top of someone else's product? Because I think that's going to happen a lot, right?
Yeah, and we do have some advantages today, and I'm not saying for someone like Anthropic and your whole system, but you could take an app that you would like to deploy and build a pretty good example of it in Replit or something similar. You could vibe code it, which is a great way to communicate with your developer what you're looking for because it's so much more than flat drawings. With respect to if you're going to deploy and not do it in-house, it's still best practices to have a data privacy person and a chief technical officer because someone has to know what your internal data sources are, has to know the stacks that you can see. You normally do have something. Again, that idea of the agentic constitution at the 20% layer is that piece where the board starts to look at the things it may not realize are part of a deployment but are very important. And the CTO is normally going to be the one who's going to make sure that the board's desire is translated to code. But that can only happen as if they're engaging each other in these builds. So,
because you say a couple of times in the Constitution, this needs to happen before the first line of code is written. That needs to happen before the first line of code is written. But a lot of companies are buying code that's already written.
Right.
So I guess they have to understand what it is they're buying.
Right.
And can they truly? I guess they
right.
can.
I mean, if they have a vision and they hand it to Anthropic and they say, this is what we're allowed to do. Can we do this with your product? That's a place to start the conversation, right? Just like you would say, can I hook this product to my product? Does it work with my existing stack? You want to make sure that whatever product you pick up, whatever vendors you use, are in accordance with what your risk tolerance is and what your vision is with respect to deployment.
How much of what we see as being described as AI is truly AI or just the algorithm that's been renamed as AI? Do you have an opinion?
Yeah. That's such an interesting question. I didn't realize, but when I was at GE Aircraft in 1998, I helped to draft the first engine health agreement. I'd forgotten about it in 1998, which was a telemetric agreement, and it beamed down live data of what was happening in the engines to the mechanics at the bottom. And, I had to write the agreement so the board would, get comfortable with having it signed. So AI has been around, pattern searching and this type of, pre-generative kind of stuff has been around for a long time. And it comes with, its own distinct issues, but it tends to be human in the loop centered still. What we're moving into now is the risk of a few degradations that can really be problematic for AI. One of them is that the views the knowledge, the diversity pools are becoming smaller with who's actually getting a voice in it, who's contributing because they don't have the hardware and the software or the knowledge. So what's one of the things we're doing? We're killing our own pool of knowledge with AI. Contributing to that is what everyone calls slop, which is just poorly just let the computer go out and scrape whatever it wants, make whatever decisions, and hallucinate its little tail off, and it's just having a good old time. Again, that taints the water. When it becomes generative, when we see that we can really affect it and it will stay within there and override its hallucination tendencies, we're getting somewhere. We're not there yet. We're just not there. So I think if you're asking me about generative AI, if you're asking about whether it's making its own decisions autonomously, it can. Not good ones yet, not great ones, not consistently. So I think in the future, we're going to see more independent AI decision-making. That decisions are embedded deeper. Good decision-making metrics become part of the deployment build. I said January 2026, I said this would be the year of the decision regarding AI. And I believe that. I believe the decision with AI is controlling AI this year. How it makes its decisions, how you make your decisions around it. The decision is everything, the decision to revisit it. But I don't think everything we do now is AI. We're still learning the rules around it. And some of the stuff we're doing is tainting, unfortunately. And we need to be cognizant of how we affect the pools of thought.
Have you got more?
It was more of a question about accountability again. Because I think all of this, the worry that there is about letting the AI go roam free, losing control of it, it is kind of the same fear that can be applied to human beings.
Right.
When you lose accountability in the chain because you delegate and delegate and delegate, going back to care more. And do you think it's something that could be replicated to human beings too? This level of accountability?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we're doing when we're saying there is a conversation to be had to where accountability lies, and accountability lies in making sure our intents are properly expressed and properly coded. Accountability lies in human primacy. There is nothing with machine primacy. It solves nothing. It does nothing. It creates problematic. So accountability of the human is everything right now. It is what the magic of AI is, because the magic really is in the brain. It's not in the tool. It's in our ability to create with it and do magical things with it. But it's also in our honest responsibility to put guardrails, to protect community, to protect people, and to put meaningful guardrails around our deployments so we're participating in a healthy ecosystem of AI, not a poisoned one. So accountability, very important.
Yeah, your section on accountability reminded me of the old basketball coach John Wooden's famous quote of "Never confuse activity with achievement."
Yeah.
And it almost seems like that's how you look at accountability in this, is like, just because there's somebody that you're going to say is responsible for it doesn't mean that they've actually done the work so that they can really be accountable.
Right. I'm not a big fan of paper intent. A lot of what I'm seeing around AI is write it down on a piece of paper and that becomes your driving force. That's not embedded. That's why I always say embedded governance. That means there are systems around. So, after I wrote Aura, I realized there were still a number of gaps in how decisions were going to be made and how accountability, standard operating procedures, for lack of a better word, on how we do some of this stuff. And that's where my focus has been, to make sure there is actual accountability, there's actual control, actual understanding. It doesn't require everyone to get a technical degree, but it does require those in rooms making decisions for people that it's going to affect who aren't in that room to take on what they need to know to make these decisions responsibly. And so that's what I help them with.
Ordinarily, the student asks this question, but I'm going to ask it. What do young lawyers, recently graduated lawyers, people deciding whether to go to law school, what should they be doing now to understand how their world is about to change? Can they do anything,
Sure.
or are they just to, ride the horse and see where it takes?
No, and I think law schools are going to be participating this a lot as well. They're going to have to be training like we learned to use Westlaw. Law school is going to turn into a place that is going to show them how to use AI in a responsible fashion. Because again, what separates them is their creativity, and everyone is individually talented in their own way. Using the tool is part of what they're going to be doing. It's like, again, not showing them how to use a computer. It will come into the law school. They will learn it at law school level because by the time they get out, they're going to be expected to know it. If they don't know it, it's going to be very difficult to compete with attorneys that do know it and know how to do it right, not just know it, know how to do it right. So I think it's going to become part of the law school curriculum. And if I have anything to say about it, I'll be there giving a lecture or two and helping that thought through, because I think it's so important we support our future attorneys in a way that says, you can do this, we got you.
Okay, well, you need to come see, because have you been in the new school since we've?
I haven't yet. No. I've been out of the country for quite a bit, so I need to get over there.
All right. Well, when you get here, we'll show you all the beautiful windows. And I was talking to somebody yesterday that was a 2011 grad, I think. And by that time, the building that you and I went to law school in had seen better days. When I
Oh,
was
my.
there, it seemed practically new still. So when people talk about how awful it was, I'm like, no, it was great.
That was
Um,
great.
yeah, there we go. It was great. But I do think that what I saw change over the course of my career, I've seen technology take away a lot of the stuff that seemed very low value for me to be doing anyway.
Right.
I sat in basements and file cabinet, went through file cabinets of document after document, droning on into my dictaphone about on what date Bob sent a letter to
Yeah.
Bill about the whatever, and so I think it's a positive that all of that soul destroying low value work goes away.
Mhm.
On the other hand, I got lots of hours doing that. And so this is a left field question, but will this finally be the death of the billable hour?
I was a general counsel for so long. I've got a very different philosophy. I did do some firm work, but I'm an in-house counsel by nature. You're talking to someone who uses regional firms because I think that's better than the big firms, because if they've got a good reputation regionally, it's because they're doing it, not because it's a national rep. I think the billable hour is pretty abused in the U.S., so I think it is going to change. I think they're going to get more project based, like consulting is doing. It's going to be more project based. I'll never have again a $16,000 PowerPoint bill, which I did have one time. I called up the law firm. I think I must have laughed for 20 minutes. I was like, it was reduced down to 2,000, just so you know. So look, I mean, the billable hours got what it deserves coming to it. When I have never had $1,000 an hour thought, I think that's my problem. I'm jealous. So
No, in fact, I remember when I first started practicing, I just like, it freaked me out that somebody had paid $150 for me spending an hour being totally confused about whatever it was I was supposed to be doing.
yeah, I mean, in aviation, I've gotten some good billable hours when I've done things on the side as a consultant. I mean, because it's such an esoteric type of a thing. But look, I'm someone who believes in efficiency. I bring as much in as I can. I think so much of this low hanging fruit can be done by AI now. But again, you've got to make the commitment to do it responsibly and learn the rules of how you do that. And once you do that, you are participating in a wonderful ecosystem that has unlimited capacity for human creativity.
So are you optimistic that all the lawyers we're helping create and educate here at the law school and the many others are still going to have something to do?
Yes, if they buy into the idea that it's their creativity and their specific views that can never be replicated by AI, it's their advantage and their edge. So low-hanging fruit is one thing. Don't make it your personality. It's very dreadful.
It is. Okay. The thing that's kind of scary is the way law school is all about critical thought.
Yeah.
And it's risky the way I see getting taken away.
No, you red team yourself. I mean, one of the things that I love to do with AI is plan negotiations. Nothing better than going four layers down a negotiation. But what are they going to come back with? Yeah, but I wouldn't say that. That's so much fun. You know, I used to negotiate. I love negotiating. You know, Harvard School of Business Mastery. I love negotiation. But there's something about sitting there and saying, yeah, let me game this out. That is very satisfying because it prepares you in a way you otherwise wouldn't be thinking. Use it as an ideation partner. Use it to argue against you. These are all legitimate uses that level up your creativity.
That's almost exactly the same answer that the managing partner of Gibson Dunn gave the student co-hosts that said they were afraid of AI. So
Okay.
there you go.
It's exactly how I feel about it.
Well, no, the people of a certain level of experience see an opportunity here.
Yes.
And I understand why the people just starting out are just like, oh my God, the world is changing and I'm being taught by people that were from the other world.
Well, back at home, definitely.
Yeah. Well,
It's scary.
We won't translate that part into Italian when Professor Beck got here.
And that's how you know that's a problem. It's just like no. All jokes aside, I'd like to play us into stereotypes because as a person abroad, you kind of learn to love them.
Yes.
Do you think there are countries, in your personal experience, of course, that will bite into this kind of AI use faster than others?
Oh, I think we're seeing it. I think the GCC, Vision 2030, in which they've met and surpassed most of their goals, knowing that they're going to be a most favored status incubation place for the U.S. They are moving at a faster pace than, let's say, Egypt, which is very much in a place of this sounds like just a reason to unemploy us and to ruin our lives. So everyone's in different. Singapore just released its Agentic Constitution framework about 2 weeks ago or something. And so, I mean, everyone's in a different spot, just like with crypto. And there's a lot of FOMO at different levels for different reasoning, and you have to meet your clients where they're at. You know, you can't be a Lamborghini with everyone. Sometimes you really need to be a Chevy Nova and start the process slow.
Sounds great. What did we miss? The famous ending deposition question.
Yeah.
I asked you that I didn't ask you.
I don't know that we've missed anything. What I want to say is that, you know, it's a tough time for boards and for leadership, but done well, this is going to be an amazing creative leap, an amazing ability to get new things done, an amazing time to level your people up, not just let them go. Use them. Don't let your good institutional knowledge walk out in the door. Level it up, train them, work with them, and we will all benefit.
That's a great place to end. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.